in the middle of an existential crisis where your very life is on the line because of what might be in the air around you. And when nations face this kind of existential crisis, they look to leaders, they look to leadership in order to get clarity and comfort in these difficult times. I cannot think of another person, honestly, on this continent right now who can help us make sense of the present. And so let me very briefly introduce Professor Thuli Madonsela. How about this, ladies and gentlemen? Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. You know how difficult that is when Lionel Messi is part of that group and any number of famous people. Forbes Africa Person of the Year. The BBC's 100 Women's List of 2016, a list that celebrates the world's most influential and unshakable, quote unquote, female leaders of that year. The German Presidential Medal. Just the other day, as many of you know, the French president's Knight of the Legion of Honor, established in 1802 by none other than Napoleon Bonaparte. This is, by the way, the highest French order of merit, both civil and military, awarded to our guests. Now, to us ordinary people on the ground, as South Africans like to say, Prof Madonsela, you are or were South Africa's public protector in the vital years of 2009 to 2016, fighting corruption on the one hand and defending the rule of law on the other, against the most flagrant abuse of power in our country since the apartheid order. These were the years of President Zuma and the Gupta family. I'll come back to that, obviously, later on. But what people might not know is that you were one of the 11 technical experts that helped draft the South African Constitution. Professor Thuli Madonsela, welcome to the show. It's an honor to have you.
Thank you.
So, thank you. So I'm going to start with a few softballs. There's some personal stuff, and then we'll get into the more serious sort of political stuff, and then we're going to get into the leadership issues embedded in all of that. So your initial education before Wits and Harvard is in Swaziland. I didn't know that. What exactly, Prof Thuli, is the Swazi connection?
Thank you for this very kind introduction, Prof Jonathan, and to my friend Louise. Thank you for this privilege, and greetings to every colleague in the room and elsewhere. The Swazi connection for my family dates back to my great-grandfather. My father was born in Mpumalanga, a place called Daggarskraal, at his mother's place, but his mother was married to a Swazi, also a former Swazi national. And my father then had that connection. But how we ended up studying in Swaziland was because my father was one of the pioneers in creating the taxi industry, what we call the long distance taxi industry. And every Friday he would go to Swaziland with the migrant workers and on Sunday bring them back. And in the process, he decided to take us to study in Swaziland. And we were also subjected to the same kind of migrant pattern of coming back and forth. So we were not in exile. We were there as education migrants.
Oh, that is fascinating. But that was both for your school education, but also your first degree, in fact, from the University of Swaziland. So I want to ask you, your dad was, as you said, a trader. Your mother was a domestic worker. And you, without hyperbole, are one of the world's most admired leaders. What did your parents do right?
I guess they were role models. And firstly, thank you for your conclusion that I I do right by humanity, because that's all we can do. What I think my parents did right was they led by example. They were very strict, they were very religious, and both of them honest. If you came with something they had never bought at their house, you would be shouted at and told where to take or how to take it back. And if somebody came to my father selling him an iron, well, they didn't have cell phones those days, an iron or a kettle or a radio, my father would pull out his shambok and want to beat him up, because if he sees that it's a young boy or a young male, he concluded that that was stolen property, and therefore he would be creating a market. So they sort of led by example. But above everything else, my father used to tell us that the most important helping hand you'll ever have is the one at the end of your arm. But more than anything else, when I look back now, it's how they reacted to exponential changes in their lives. Not once did I ever hear my father presenting himself as a victim. In fact, even to just get his story that his property was taken away from him at a place called Albertan. It was more similar to the case of Sophia Town. I only learned that from my mother, from my eldest brother, who just passed on now, and from my cousins. My father just lived and did the best he could with the resources he had. But of course, he was political, and he did think that there was an injustice, and he represented himself in court. And he was the lion. No, he was the hunter who told the story from the hunter's point of view.
Yeah, what a fascinating. You're just reminding me now of an amazing book that I just read. I don't know how I missed it all my life, called Native Nostalgia by Jacob Lamini, which is really a book about the other side of the experience of apartheid. It wasn't just people thinking of themselves as victims, but the other way around. Is it true, by the way, that you turned down a cabinet position, and why?
Well, not really a cabinet position. At least it was never directly offered. I turned down an offer to go to Parliament, and I was assured on the list. They had asked COSATU to nominate 10 females to achieve a gender balance, but also an alliance balance. And I felt that the best contribution I could make to the country at the time would be as a researcher, academic, policy analyst, policy advisor, and legal advisor. And I pursued that kind of process. I was mainly involved in the drafting of laws, analysis of existing ones, and just transformation of the justice system mainly.
Okay, so this is one of the two questions in the 20 or so questions that I wasn't sure I should ask. So I'm going to ask your forgiveness right up front in case I get it wrong. But you know, I'm not one for gossip. But every time I see you and me, the time we had coffee together and so on, you're always alone. Is there a Valentines in your life?
You. Yes, absolutely. There is a Valentine in my life, but it's because you see me in the Western Cape. If you saw me in Gauteng, you'd never see me alone. I'm always with someone. But in the Western Cape, because we live in two different cities, we hardly ever together this side, although occasionally we are.
Right. Well, I'm delighted to hear that. Now, you know, I've sort of went into the dark web, you know, to try and figure out what people say about you or what people claim they know about you. Now, one of those claims is that you at some stage pondered, you know, becoming an advocate versus becoming an archaeologist. Now, I suppose both of those professions involve digging up things, you know, but if you were given the chance again, would you have chosen the less controversial occupation?
No, certainly not. I do hope that in my lifetime I can still do archaeology, maybe as in an amateur basis. I think I feel it in my bones that I'm called to help this world become more just, and not just in terms of us going to court to vindicate our rights. I think justice starts in everyday justice. How do we treat each other every day? And how do we treat each other every day depends on our ethical foundations, our moral foundations, and our legal foundations. We need to know the law to keep the law and to treat people justly. But we also need to just know ethics, right and wrong, in terms of social justice, in terms of avoiding corruption, and this kindness. All of those are ethical issues that are part of a proper everyday justice system. And of course, I've also dedicated my life in promoting a just judicial system and a system of just laws. Now at Stellenbosch University, we primarily focusing on the laws, making sure that it's not one size fits all, because if you do so, people fall behind. But I love archaeology, and therefore my favorite places would be places like Egypt, Bolivia, and I still hope to go to Israel and China.
Fascinating. I know that you have two amazing children whom I also discovered were authors, Wantu and Wenzile. What do they think? I'm just curious. I got two kids as well, you know, and you're always scared when you're in public that people think one thing of you and your kids think another. But what do your two children think about you as a mother leader?
Well, firstly, thank you for considering them as amazing, because that's great feedback from the public. I do think they're amazing, but my opinion doesn't count because I'm the mother. I think they think I'm generally a good person, a person who does their best to serve humanity and to make this place better than I found it. So not to leave it better, to make it, because we can't mess it up and then just towards the end of our life, then start creating a legacy to leave it better. I think the issue is to try and make it better for all of us every day. That's what I think they think I do, and they themselves try to do the same.
Yeah, I wonder if I could just, I didn't plan to ask you this, but I know the broader family participated in the writing of this incredibly well-illustrated children's book. Do you just want to do a shout out for that book?
Absolutely. Firstly, Prof. Jonathan, thank you for the kind and a very super kind remarks that you made about the book. You, John Carney, Felicia Mabuza-Sattler, and many others gave us such kind remarks on the book that we authored that is called Melo's Kingdom. It's again part of our contribution as a family to a life that is anchored in Ubuntu. I am because we are. I will look after you. I will treat you well because you are a part of me. Our lives are interconnected, and together we're better against the elements. And this is teaching the young ones about Ubuntu, but also about leadership skills, the skills of resilience, kindness, honesty, courage, collaboration, etc. And it's done through fables, proverbs, and a little bit of biblical stuff. But if you're not a Christian, don't be offended. It's just the lessons from each religion, and it's not really meant to be super Christian. But of course, as a family, we are Christians, and therefore we drew from our own value system.
I would highly recommend the book to those of you on this webinar. It is, I've got one granddaughter, unfortunately, she's in New Zealand, she's about to turn 3, and she got that book in the mail. And I'd love her to grow up reading Melo's amazing story. let's get, if you don't mind, into some of the more serious issues that confronted us over the past decade or so, and I'll end up by talking about the pandemic leadership issues and so on. But let's go back, if you don't mind, a number of years ago, when the most anticipated investigation ever in our country concerned, on the one hand, the upgrade to the private residence of former President Jacob Zuma, using Kandla home, and then, of course, the government task team that probed the Gupta plane landing at Waterkloof Air Force Base. I'm really curious, especially about the report you produced called "Secure in Comfort," and then there is a long sort of subtitle to what eventually became a book. Now, you must have known that when you put out that report, you were walking into the belly of the beast. My question is, were you scared?
I think of the investigation itself, Prof, I was not scared, because as a team, we had established tools of engagement that we would treat every case the same, regardless of whether it involved a cleaner or a president. We also were using exactly the same formula. What happened? What should have happened? Is there a discrepancy between what happened and what should have happened? If there's a discrepancy, is it one that can be explained, that is justifiable, that is reasonable under the circumstances? Or shall we call it improper conduct? And if it is improper conduct, was anybody harmed, or was the community as a whole harmed? And if so, how do we place whoever was harmed as close as possible to where they would have been but for this? When we dealt with the Nkandla matter of abuse of state funds in the name of security for the president, we're talking about R250 million used to upgrade a private homestead of one person. We used the same tools, and therefore there was no fear when it came to the investigation. Eventually, though, I was afraid, particularly for my children, because we started getting threats. As it became clear that the findings were not going to be sweetheart findings, we started getting threats.
You see, I mean, I respect you so enormously, but there's something about you I don't understand, Prof Thuli. You just told the story. I mean, they came for you. They came for you big time. You know, I remember opening up the front page of the Sunday Times. They came for your personal life. They came for your finances. They came for they threw every brick at you. And when I listen to you recall what must have been a very disturbing, if not traumatic event, you are so calm. You are so even. Do you ever get angry?
I do. I do. The only difference is I rarely ever get angry, number one. Number two, I'm quick to call myself to order, because I do think that we all get afraid, and anger is usually an expression of what we feel. And the trick, though, is to recognize where you are, reset. Well, for example, Prof, you may remember me appearing before the Portfolio Committee on Justice, and the chairperson, you know, just going at me. We had crossed all of the T's and dotted all of the I's because we were trying to impress them. And that's one thing about change that we all need to learn, is that you can never impress everyone in life. But there we were thinking, okay, we've addressed everything they raised last year. This year should be smooth sailing. Oh my God, they took issue with everything. The report is too close. Whereas last year they had said, the look and feel of the reports needed to be updated. And they took issue with the number of people. Last year, they'd said they needed some of the executives before them so that they can see them. So I lost it when the chairperson said, Thuli walks on water. I gave a little bit of what I think. But so that was anger. And then I caught myself and reset and rebuilt the conversation in a manner that was supposed to take us to where the purpose of the meeting wanted us to go. But that momentarily loss of my cool, and they say, whatever you lose, please don't lose your head, because once you've lost your head, you autopilot. So you will recall that that event ended up being an event about that scuffle instead of an event about our report and the fund. So that's a lesson learned there, that don't only begin with the end in mind, as Carver says, stay with the end in mind, even if you're thrown a curveball. Anticipate curveballs. Don't always assume that when you do things right, the response is going to be right, to be graceful and gracious. It doesn't work like that. But eventually, of course, I apologized to the chairperson and we were cool. But that momentary loss of my head was costly.
Yeah, well, listening to you, I just remember that joke in the apartheid years of Bishop Tutu being on a boat out on a lake with some nets and boat overturned or something. And Tutu walked on water. And the burger reported beautifully that Tutu cannot swim. So I suppose, in a sense, you can't win with some of these battles. This is a beautiful book that another leader like you wrote, and I enjoyed reading it enormously. Much better than her husband's book, by the way. And it's a book by Michelle Obama. And, you know, she liked to say, even outside of the book, she likes to say that a crisis doesn't make a leader. A crisis reveals a leader. In other words, it reveals who you are. What have all of these crises, particularly as public protector, what do you believe they revealed about you as a leader?
I'm not sure. I think it's probably people that can answer that question, but just from where I'm sitting, I would say that the experiences have revealed my ability to grow from adversity, because every adversity you meet introduces you to a part of yourself that you didn't know exist. And that part could be the part of whatever you fear, your fears are and what your hopes are. And you have to then decide during that process, will you gravitate towards your fears or will you gravitate towards your hopes? And I guess based on the fact that I had a lot of crises growing up as a child, over the years I grew, because everything that kicks you out of your comfort zone grows you, depending on how you respond to it. And when you reach another crisis, you are you're more grown than you were before the previous crisis.
Somebody wrote of you, and I quote, as strong as she is, she cries on the job sometimes. Are you comfortable with vulnerability, or what I have somewhere else spoken about as brokenness? That is the sense that I'm not perfect, the sense that I make mistakes, the sense that I could get it wrong, the sense that, as you showed, demonstrated earlier, that I can apologize despite being, you know, such a prominent person. Are you comfortable with particularly that spiritual sense of brokenness, which, as you know, doesn't mean you morally compromised or wrong. It simply means that your strength comes from that very vulnerability that we speak of.
I think over the years, I've become comfortable with vulnerability, and it comes from really understanding that sometimes being vulnerable is the bravest thing you can do. When we were growing up, we were taught that, you know, brave people don't show any signs of humanity, but at times it's that vulnerability that enables other people to realize that you're human like them. But of course, you have to be strategic in how you show your vulnerability. You can be vulnerable without showing vulnerability. For example, in times of crisis, it's important to keep things together for your team. So if they see you falling apart, they are going to fall apart. And I've had to go through, I was a trade unionist. It's a very difficult thing to be a trade unionist. And especially if the strike is going on forever and people are hungry. And you can't show that you're crying for the people who are not getting their wages. You've got to, you cry inside. And as a pub protector, yes, the only times I think I cried publicly were when the people I regard as Gogo Dlaminis were treated so badly that I just couldn't understand what's wrong with human beings. But on the big cases, I was able to keep things together.
Apart from the Valentine question, this is the other question I really pondered whether I should ask it. But, you know, I'm not a journalist, but if I don't ask you this question, I would be dishonest to the ethics of journalism, which is to ask tough questions, bubbling in the public mind. And then, of course, it's up to you to decide, as you no doubt will, how to respond. So let me please ask you this question, in part because I've been at so many braai fires and so many, you know, social church gatherings and so on, that I've heard this over and over again. So I'm going to ask you this, Prof Madonsela. This is what people say. How did we go from you, the previous public protector, to the current occupant of that position? Or if I may put it less personally, has the office of the public protector been captured?
Well, it's not a fair question, Prof. Jonathan. I would say to the public, all I can say is the majority of people in that office are people I found there. Some of them had been there since the time of the Advocate General. And then when the office became the Pub Protector under Salbi Bagwa, under Mushwana. So the majority of people remained the same. And what we did when I was there, we worked on learning and growing together. And I must say, it didn't start that well. I went into that office thinking I had all of the answers, as new leaders do, you know. New brooms sweep better. So that's how I moved. And in the early stages of my office, it was around 2012 already. By December 2013, no, by December 2011, I refused to give Christmas bonuses. So imagine people build, this is their cheese, you know, they build around, that's Cheese Station C, if you've read Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. So everyone builds their life around that, and I took away that cheese. And I came back in 2012, I could feel that my team had unfollowed me. Not on Twitter, I wasn't even on Twitter then, but in real life, because it said that leadership is about followership, or the test of leadership is followership. If you have the title, but no one is following you, and people are only going to jump when you leverage your authority, then you're not leading, you're just commanding. So I came, yes, people were working, but I could tell that the morale was really, really down. And then I met at an ANC event, the current SARS commissioner, Edward Kisweta, who said to me, okay, I hear you right in terms of the concerns you have that people are getting bonuses for disposing the highest number of cases, but whilst doing a shoddy job. And those who do a proper job, they dispose less cases and then they don't get bonuses. So that's a right thing. However, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And advised us that we needed as an institution to walk through a journey of determining what was our purpose, not our mandate, because the mandate is determined by the Constitution. It's the power to investigate improper conduct in state affairs and the public service, to report and take appropriate remedial action. But interpret that and say, what really do you give to the people of South Africa? What's your value proposition? So we went through that as an institution, and it was a slow process, and the ultimate results were also not exactly the words I wanted, but what it did for me was it created a team that works together. So I would say it's still the same people that working and learning and growing together left them like that. I also left a standard operating protocol that I personally drafted that determines what you do from the moment a case comes into the system to writing a report and engaging with stakeholders after writing a report. I do hope that the institution uses that standard operating protocol.
Well put. I wanted to just note that there are some amazing questions for you coming up in the chat room, and I know Louise is monitoring all of that. And so if we have some time towards the end, I really would like one or two of those questions, Louise, to get put to our guests, especially the one about advice for young women who want to become, as one of them said, badass leaders, like yourself. Thank you also for a beautiful, I haven't heard it this way before. You just sort of said it by the way, but it's a really important distinction between commanding and leading, between having people jump because you have instructions versus people leading you, following because of the authentic leader that you are. So I think that's a really important takeaway so far. So coming to current affairs, former President Jacob Zuma has refused, as you know, to show up at the Commission of Inquiry. Does he have a legal leg to stand up?
Well, I must firstly disclose a conflict of interest, that my reaction on this one is biased because I am the one who directed that a Commission of Inquiry be created. I don't think he has a legal leg to stand on, or even a moral one. President Zuma is the one who established the Commission of Inquiry. He also expanded its powers. He claims in some of the papers and public pronouncements that his hands were tied. But he didn't feel that his hands were tied when he expanded the powers of the Commission of Inquiry. And when it comes to the judge, there's always a separation between selection and appointment. Even with the judges, they're selected by the Judicial Services Commission and they're appointed by the president. So it is not true that when the selection power has been taken away from you, then you are left without any recourse. If you feel that somebody who has been selected does not deserve to be appointed and you have reasons that comply with our administrative law requirements, reasonableness, rational, fair, and just, if you can prove that it would be unjust, it would be unfair, it would be inequitable to appoint this person, you could refer the matter back and say, this can't work. So it's not true. President Zuma never raised that issue for 2 years, and then 2 years, well, how many? 3 years, even when he took this matter to court. He took this matter before the judge was appointed, but some of the litigation happened after the judge had already been appointed. He never raised the issue of the judge having to be potentially biased against him.
Yeah, But I just want to, I mean, I'm not a legal expert, as you know, but, you know, if equality before the law means anything, surely you must be disturbed that, you know, Norma Gigaba can be arrested by the Hawks for allegedly scraping the husband's car. Here sits the president, aided and abetted by all kinds of political leaders, with MK and Calm Yos, you know, at the entrance to the Nkandla home. I mean, the ordinary South African said, if I tried a stunt like that, they would haul me off to prison. Surely this is not, since you're a drafter of the Constitution, a fellow drafter, this is dangerous for democracy. When one set of rules, I suppose there's parallels here with Donald Trump, but I don't want to get go down that road this evening. What should ordinary South Africans think? Because they know they won't get this special treatment if they defy a duly constituted hearing.
Right. Well, I have two comments to that, Prof, is that number one, we need to lift the threshold of what we consider acceptable treatment of ordinary people, particularly ordinary people that are poor. I often am worried that when people in power are treated properly, we then say, no, we need to treat them badly like we treat ordinary people. Sometimes the treatment does not mean we should lower it for the ones who are getting a good treatment. It just means we should raise the bar for what we consider tolerable in the way we treat ordinary people. For example, the way ordinary people have been arrested during COVID-19, instead of following the procedure in terms of the regulations where people have to be told wear a mask, and if they do wear the mask instantly, then there's no reason to arrest them. When it comes to President Zuma, he can't be arrested without a proper process of making sure that there are contempt of court proceedings, and if there's a determination that he was indeed in contempt of the commission, then he can be arrested on that basis.
No, thank you very much. One of my favorite writers is the Pulitzer Prize winning author Anne Applebaum, who wrote this amazing book, which I really do suggest everyone reads. It's called Twilight of Democracy. But related to that book, she wrote an article in The Atlantic. And it's an article not so much about the big leader, but about those who are complicit in enabling the big leader to exist. President Zuma did not appoint himself. You know, you see the complicit. Think back to the AIDS crisis, you know, under President Mbeki. I mean, it was so clearly in defiance of science, and people were literally dying, thousands, mothers and babies in particular. But we focus so much on the leader, and we don't focus on those who are complicit. I just want to read to you two quotes from the Atlantic article, which I'm happy to post later in the chat room. For tormented intellectuals, she writes, collaboration is also offered a kind of relief, almost a sense of peace. It meant that they were no longer constantly at war with the state, no longer in turmoil. The pleasure of conformity, she writes, the lightness of heart that it grants, the way that it solves so many personal and professional dilemmas, end of quote. What do you say about, again, not so much President Zuma in this case, but those who are complicit in keeping, you know, alive this charade of decency within government?
Well, firstly, Prof, I agree with the author of the book. Do post it. I would very much love to get a copy of it, or even just a blanket summary of it. I think both the wrongdoers and those who look the other way wrong society. I know there's often quotes that say it's not the wrongdoers that are bad, it's those who allow it to happen. I just think the ones who do wrong have to take responsibility for their wrongdoing. And then the enablers have to take responsibility for the consequences, because the consequences are not just allowing this person to get away with wrongdoing. The consequences, as you said earlier, Prof, are about systematizing the culture of wrongdoing. If you look at how corruption became endemic in the last 10 years, it was people realizing that as long as you steal and give some of it to powerful people, then you're all set. And how did people get to that conclusion? They saw it happening. Some of them being just ordinary clerks, ordinary admin officers in the financial management system or procurement system were dragged into that conveyor belt of corruption. But once they had assisted the wrongdoer to do the corrupt deed, they also assisted themselves. So you create that culture. We often talk at TUMA about something called epic leadership, that not only should you be ethical, do the right thing the right way because it's the right thing to do, but always keep purpose in mind. Above everything also, always keep impact in mind. That what might look innocuous might have a systemic impact in the culture of the organization. And ultimately also you've got to ask yourself as part of the epic leadership is, does this show commitment to serve? And going back to the issue of President Zuma, when I was asked previously about whether it was correct that some leaders are saying they're giving him space to breathe, to think it through. And I said, it's okay, because in life, we have to let soft power move people forward first, if we can. I think it was Lao Tzu who says, the best general is one who wins the war without firing a single shot. That's what I learned in strategy. But when the time comes to make a decision that is firm, it must be made. And we can't wait for the criminal justice system. If you're a member of an organization that has represented itself to this public to say it would uphold the law, and you blatantly say you're not going to uphold the law, that organization has a moral duty to charge you in terms of its own ethics code, and find you guilty and punish you according to its organizational precepts, which might include being expelled from that organization or whatever the organization deems appropriate. Because that's the only way the organization can be telling us as a public that it walks the talk.
Thank you for that. Just I'm going to close now my part and then ask Louise to direct some of the questions to you. But let me just ask you this in conclusion. The pandemic, of course, is a business school case study in leadership, or at least the management. And initially, as you know, there was enormous support across the country for President Ramaphosa, because he really did step up to the plate and took charge of the microphone and spoke to us in ways that I think gave a lot of comfort and direction to citizens. But things seem to come off the rail a little bit in relation to, and I'm just going to mention two things. One is, and I know you wrote about this in the South African Journal of Science, but the seemingly irrational rules, the fact that I can go to the casino, but I can't go to church, you know, on the one hand, and the fact that we were so slow out of the blocks compared to other countries when it came to the advance purchasing of vaccines. What are some of the leadership lessons, would you say, about pandemic management in South Africa?
Well, thank you, Prof. I would say it's really agile thinking and agile action, and impact consciousness and collaboration. I would say those three things: agile thinking, agile action, impact consciousness, collaboration, and then I would say systems thinking. Because part of the problem is thinking you've got a fly on the wall and you take your sledgehammer, you hit it. But before you do so, you don't calculate how much of the wall will be destroyed when you hit that fly, and what will be the cost of repairing the wall, and can you really repair it? And I do agree with you that the president did an excellent job. But part of the problem, which we wrote in that article, and other colleagues, and thank you for the privilege, mentioned it, is that there isn't enough social science in our response to the pandemic. And I would also hesitate that there are no engineers. So you're getting doctors who are only looking at health, even then excluding mental health. They're just looking at health. Then you're getting politicians who are getting involved even in procurement, which then excludes the technicians who know how to do due diligence. I would say for President Ramaphosa, and if he ever hears this message, if he doesn't want to live to regret how he's handling this pandemic, he really has to yield to collaboration. And collaboration is not consulting people at will and then moving forward whichever way you want. Collaboration means we shouldn't be having the DA screaming outside the ring. We shouldn't be having the EFF screaming outside the ring. Everyone should be in the arena. And that's probably choosing the Disaster Management Act has allowed the executive to fly solo. But you don't have to be restricted by legislation. The Disaster Management Act allowed an intergovernmental committee. And that would have allowed everyone to be in the room. And then it's also supposed to have an interdisciplinary committee that is constantly part of this, not consulted wherever, but consistent. Just lastly, Prof, the best war general is not the one who knows all of the tricks of war. The best war general is the one who knows how to bring the best of the society that he leads and let them lead when they have to, whilst he or she keeps everything together. And the ANC or the government or the president are not called upon to be the inventor of all of our solutions. They're supposed to integrate these solutions and make sure that everyone who can help us solve these problems is in the group.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Louise, over to you.
Oh, so there's a lot in what you've just said, Thuli. I so agree with you. I just want to say yes, absolutely. So there are lots of questions in the chat. Some of the questions are around your political plans, and I've heard you say many times you are not going to go into politics and you don't want to be president. Do you want to just confirm, is that still the case?
Yes, it is still the case. Not my calling, not my purpose in life.
Not your calling, not your purpose. So then,
and no skills.
So there was a few questions from Cherise van der Linde, and I think that's what Professor Jansen referred to earlier. She said, what advice do you have for young females in this country to become a boss lady like you?
I would say, don't focus on the power, focus on what you love. For me, what has kept me going is really deciding what do I love. And at this stage, it's two things that are extremely important to me. Justice, which includes social justice, and peace. Well, my name, by the way, means peace. So perhaps it bothers me when there isn't any peace. Secondly, when you've decided what you love and you anchor your life around that, and this could be in the workplace or it could be an NGO, because people are always saying, sometimes at work, you're not in a space to choose what you are going to do. But find an angle in that work of what you like. And also you can have a side hustle that is an NGO or a side job where you learn these other skills. And then have faith in yourself. Believe that you can achieve what you want to achieve. Work with others, have faith that other people will join you. And hope that all of these things are going to come together, because things don't happen overnight. So it's really that faith, love, and hope, because that will then give you courage to keep going on, especially in the face of adversity, exponential change, and just radical uncertainty. Knowing why are you doing this becomes extremely important. Having faith that it is achievable and that humanity will change and join you becomes extremely important.
Thank you. And Cherise, who asked the question, said she has a tattoo that says faith, hope, and love tattooed on her wrist. So clearly the universe wanted you to answer that question to confirm where she's standing on this. So I think we've come to the end, but we do want to hear some thoughts around, you know, we are in a crisis. There are many people with enormous power. If you could have them in a room, if we could bring them into this conversation, Thuli, what would your advice be to people who have power at this time? I love your idea of leaders need to bring citizens together to facilitate collaboration, but is there anything else that you want to add to that?
Absolutely. I think what we need to do is accept that we all want to survive, and to survive as a country, as a continent, and as a world, we need each other. And leaders should look at what is common ground, because I think there's so much shouting about what we disagree on. We can agree on what is common ground. How do we take this country forward? For example, one of the divisive issues is the issue of social justice. There are those who say, what happened yesterday. But here at Stellenbosch University, we say, no, what happened yesterday defines today. And you will see that with Justice Edwin Cameron saying in Daniels versus Cribante that yesterday remains with us until we answer its claims to justice. So then there are those who just say, no, blame everything on the past. There is no problem with stealing from government because things were stolen already. I really don't understand that language. That because somebody stole yesterday and I come in and say, I want to replace them because I'm a good person, but it's okay for me to steal as well. We need to come into the room and say, how are we going to resolve these issues? Social justice, integrity, economic advancement, and social advancement. Sustainable development is not just about economic growth. It's about improving the well-being of everyone in society. We need to do that. When we've answered that question, it becomes easier to also then say, how are we going to hold each other accountable? Incidentally, all of those building blocks are in the Constitution. We have a Constitution with a clear vision of society, a society that is founded on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. It's very clear about the government that must carry that journey, must carry us through that journey, should be one that is ethical. It also indicates that there should be accountability, and it spells out basic entitlements of citizens, which include Section 9, which says equality is equal enjoyment of all human rights and freedoms, and Section 7.2 that says government must take action. But if government takes action, you can't take action alone. We need to be all represented so that there's a voluntariness in us moving forward. As it stands at this stage, there's no voluntariness. And you guys, you're all leaders in the room. If you're running a company or an organization where to move anybody in the room, you need coercive power or hard power, you would have a difficulty. We need some kind of social compact, not small social compact with a group of big business. You need a social compact with every citizen, or at least all groupings of citizens.
So on that note, I think we're going to end this. I just want to say to you, Thuli, you are speaking the language. Ashraf Garda, who's on the call, is mobilizing people around this idea of a champion nation and that everyone has to play a role. He arranged a session with us recently where we're talking about this idea of a united democratic movement of citizens who are just going to stop waiting. And I think that's everything that you're about in the M plan is about citizens not waiting anymore, but deciding it's our future and we're going to do something to create the future that we committed to. So on that note, a request to everybody, if you are able to just complete the feedback form. I have sent the note in the chat. I realized we didn't get to everybody's questions. We will get a copy of this chat and send this to Professor Jansen and Professor Madonsela in case there's an opportunity to for them to respond maybe on social media. Professor Jansen, thank you very much for taking the lead on making this happen. The next conversation is next week with Professor Adam Habib. And I know that that's also going to be a really interesting conversation. So I hope everybody's signed up to that conversation. And today we heard that there's going to be a conversation with Dr. Rompela and another conversation. Now my brain's gone mush. I can't remember who the other one was. We've got this amazing group of people coming up.
Archbishop
Thabo.
Yeah.
Thank you. And so we are mobilizing a movement of leaders who are simply not going to wait any longer and who are going to behave as if the future belongs to us and it's in our hands. And Thuli, thank you for your leadership and for lighting our fire and get us excited about playing that role. So on that note, I am going to love you and leave you and say thank you so much for all of your contributions and being part of this today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And lots of thanks coming through on the chat.